Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Improving Compliance Invalid Punches webinar. This will be the first of an ongoing series of webinars we're entitling Mastering Blueforce, the weekly series. This one, obviously, for the week of January 16th. Now, during our webinar, we do mute everybody, so we do ask that if you have any questions or any concerns that come up during today's session, please use the GoToWebinar question area of the control panel, as shown here in the screenshot, and they will be addressed at the appropriate time in our conversations. Now, this weekly series that we are putting on has been designed to provide all of our ISS Blueforce users with the knowledge and critical tools needed to easily and efficiently master the Blueforce system. Now, all these webinars will occur twice weekly, every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. Central Time, going forward until further notice. And we expect everyone to be in at least one of the two sessions that week. Both days will be covering the same session on Tuesday and Thursday. Now, all webinars are being recorded, and we'll make them available online via the ISS Gateway site as well as YouTube. And all of our documentation, anything that I showed to you today, will also be provided and posted to the ISS Gateway as well. Now, for today's session, we are going to All right, sorry about that. I was just told that I had my slides weren't moving on forward. So as we go through today's session, we are going to be covering the following items on today's webinar. Today we'll be focused on time collection methods. I'll talk just briefly of the different options the employees have to punch in and punch out. Then we'll also go through what exactly is an invalid punch, specifically as today is the only topic we'll be covering. And then we'll go through and discuss how do I correct those invalid punches, just a general overview of that process. And then I'm going to go through how are we doing, just kind of provide you a top 10 list of which ISS locations are doing the best on invalid punch. And then lastly, we're going to talk about moving forward. How do I stop the epidemic of invalid punches, and what can I do to fix them and prevent them from future occurrences? So as we go through here, our first slide here takes you through our time collection methods. Now, just as a general overview, all of our employees have a variety of different options to punch in and punch out. The employees can use the phone system, which seems to be a pretty popular option. And that phone system is really just referred to as FONEN. So employees can call in off a phone and actually just dial a 1-800 number and actually punch in and punch out. Another way, obviously, is the Walter device. The Walter device is our biometric time clock, and our biometric time clock allows the employee to go to that particular device and punch in using a combination of their fingerprint and their employee ID. Also, we have Mobile Punch, and Mobile Punch can be used on the actual Samsung phones that have been assigned to all of our ISS issued phones, I guess you can say, as well as any tablets that may be out there. Mobile Punch allows the employee to log in and essentially pick a task, pick a job, etc., like you would do in other methods of time collection. However, the Mobile Punch also records your GPS coordinates, and that's how it knows if you are at the job site or not. The last two options featured here are a computer and a laptop, which you can actually use what's called as WebPunch. And WebPunch is just a online method of punching in and punching out. In any of these scenarios, in these four time collection methods, whether it be the phone-in, the web punch, the mobile punch, or like I mentioned earlier, the Walter, those are the four acceptable ways for an employee to punch in and punch out. Now, along the way, an employee might encounter an issue, maybe an issue clocking in by some way, shape, form. So that takes me to the question of what is an invalid punch? Now, an invalid punch can be best described as an employee attempts to punch in and punch out that require additional supervisor or manager approval in Blueforce. Now, whenever an invalid punch is recorded by Blueforce, it is noted as approval pending on the employee's Blueforce time card. Now, these approvals are essentially time wasters, or I like to recall as time wasters because they lead to extra time needed to conduct your daily time reviews. Now, for everyone on this phone call, we as the IT pay team stress that we do daily reviews of time. That way we catch those missed punches. That way we catch any scenarios where we have these invalid punches. Now, as an example, an invalid punch is recorded when an employee has trouble with a fingerprint on the Walter time clock. So for all of those on the phone call who use the Walters are already familiar that the time clock works on essentially of it's going to allow you to fail 3 times, and then it's going to say, you know what, I'm going to accept your punch. But in the meantime, as I accept your punch, I'm going to let your supervisor know that you have had issues with the fingerprint. Now, it doesn't quite tell you that it has an issue with the fingerprint. It just marks it as an invalid punch. So when you see an invalid punch related to a Walter, punch in or punch out, that almost 9 out of 10 times is because of that fingerprint. Secondly, an employee can call in from an unregistered phone number using FONEN. Now, our FONEN system, our toll-free number, for those that use that, as you know, the system will allow you to enter a job number if you call from an unregistered phone number. Now, we have that part of the system kind of quote-unquote wide open because we want the employees to be successful in punching in and punching out. Now, if they are calling from an unregistered phone number, then you will be noted as you will see an approval pending, and that's your cue to go in there and do some research and find out, is that number valid or not? And I'll show you some ways to talk about that when we talk about a little bit later on the discussion part of how to fix that going forward. We'll discuss that a little bit further. Another point is the employee punches in from outside the acceptable range when using Mobile Punch. For those that use the GPS option, which is the cell phone mobile app or the tablet mobile app, and either way, the acceptable range is just how far away from the job do we want the employee to be able to punch in or punch out. If they are 5 miles down the road from their job site, obviously it's going to come back and say, it needs approval pending because they were not at the job site when they punched in. And then lastly, we can also set up unauthorized IP addresses for WebPunch. So if you call in if you log in from an IP address on the computer, for those using WebPunch, that's not quote unquote authorized, then you're going to have a little note sent to the supervisor as well on the time card that says approval pending. So these are just some examples of what exactly an invalid punch is. Now, in all cases, the employee will be able to punch in, but from the thought process behind the Walter time clock, if the employee is going every time and every day going to work having issues at the Walter and is not taking a fingerprint the first time, it's not taking a fingerprint the second time, and finally it says, I'm going to let you in, it can be very discouraging for the employee. So one of the key things about invalid punch is that we want to make sure that we make this process easy yet effective and that we're actually capturing the time on the first punch. So we're not going to have a discouraged employee out on the job site. So invalid punches will appear very similar to this. Invalid punches will appear in Blueforce as approval pending, and especially with Walter punches, you will see them with a yellow text with a black background. And you will see a kind of common theme here. Whenever you see a black background on any of your punches in the time card screen, those are always going to be invalid punches. And you'll see on the left-hand side where it does tell you approval pendings. So just kind of quickly looking here, you will see that you do see the status says approval pending on quite a few of these lines. And over on the right, you'll see the black background with the yellow text. That signifies that that is a Walter time punch. Now, you also see on the FONEN side approval pendings, but the FONEN ones appear with a green text and black background. Now, the color coding is there just to assist you kind of from a visual standpoint. When you actually go through and see the different punches in the system, you can quickly note that, there's something wrong and kind of denote where that, what system was in use to help you kind of guide you to fixing and kind of get a solution here. Now, more so as I go through here, and let me just clear my screen. You also have mobile punches that appear very similar to the actual punches you saw a while ago with the Walter invalid punches. They're also in yellow text with a black background. So, sometimes that leads to confusion, but bottom line, the background should tell you that's an invalid punch. Now, more so, look at the bottom one, which is the web punch. If you use a web punch, the web punch appears with a gray background and black text. So it's a little different in that color coding, but all in all, the left-hand status column will show you that you do have approval pendings. Now, moving on, the invalid punches is a critical piece of the big puzzle here, because once again, like I mentioned, the employee is having an issue clocking in, or maybe doesn't understand how to punch in or punch out accurately. But at the same time, it causes more work on the side of the editor, the submitter, and the approver. Those roles in Blueforce are having to come in here and actually mark each one of those as an approved punch. It's just a time waster, as I mentioned earlier. So going further with that, all invalid punches must be corrected prior to an employee's timesheet being marked as submitted. Now, optimally, the invalid punches should be taken care of daily during your daily time reviews. Now, once again, this doesn't mean you come in on a weekend when you're off, or you come in on your off day period to work on this. This is just saying try to take care of it on a daily basis, or take care of it the next day you are at the office or at the job site. Now, to correct, you're first going to go to that time card view in Blueforce, and you're going to actually select the time card that's awaiting approval. So essentially the ones that are marked approval pending. Now once you've done that, you'll go to the top of the screen there and click on Approve Selected Time Card. And Approve Selected Time Card is always going to be located at the very top of that grid. Now when you click on Approve Selected Time Card, the system is going to actually prompt you with a nice little question. And this is kind of your opportunity to decide, do you want to actually keep the punch as it is, or do you want to actually approve it? Now, once again, if you don't approve this, if you say, I'm going to cancel here instead, the system doesn't actually accept or record that punch. It basically leaves it as a zero-time punch out there, saying you need to approve it. So all in all, you're going to have to approve it at some way, shape, form between the current time and the time you submit that timesheet. So right here on step 3, I would actually click OK, and the time card status will actually show from approval pending, and it'll actually change to timesheet is open. Now, whenever you see timesheet is open, we talk about open punches, we talk about missed punches, but that word open punches is typically a bad thing. Open punch is a punch that doesn't have a matched in or out together, or is an invalid punch. And that's what an open punch is. When you see a timesheet is open is actually the proper terminology here. Approved punches will always, an open timesheet is a good thing. So when you see timesheet is open, that's a good thing. Approved punches will always appear in orange, the orange background, to signify that the record status has been modified. Now, as we look at compliance, as we look at who's editing punches, who's going in there and adding punches manually and all that good stuff, this is actually a function when you see a orange background to an invalid punch that's been approved. Those punches are actually normal and are going to be recorded as part of the audit record. But one thing I will note, although you have corrected that invalid punch is still in the system as an invalid punch, because initially it came in inaccurately. So the employee wasn't doing something right. Maybe we had like I said, a fingerprint issue. Maybe they called in from a wrong number. In either case, an invalid punch is still going to be marked as an invalid punch, even if after you fixed it. So that will still appear on the compliance. And hence the reason why we're having the discussion today, because we want to make sure we don't record those invalid punches that first time around. Approving punches is not an acceptable daily routine. So do not get stuck in that rut of doing it on a daily basis and going through the motion. Find out, take that extra minute and find out, why are we having this issue at this job site? Why is it always the same employee having issues with the fingerprint? There are things we can do that I will discuss here momentarily that will improve your compliance score as it relates to invalid punches. So bottom line, not an acceptable daily routine, and please do not get stuck in the rut of just going through and approving punches every day. Now, invalid punches is one of those categories from the ePay compliance that we see quite often. We see quite a bit of lower scores as it relates to our overall 5 metrics that we're looking at. However, invalid punches is one of those that can be easily fixed, and this is why we chose to start this as our first topic of our weekly series. So let's look at who are our top 10 right now currently as it relates to invalid punch scores. So from a compliance standpoint, these 10 locations or these 10 ISS areas have the best invalid punch score. I'm not talking about overall score. We're looking specifically at the metric of invalid punches. So a 4.0, for those that are not familiar with this screen, a 4.0 is the highest score that you can get. That means you have perfect score, you have no invalid punches at that site. Now the way this also works is we look back at a trailing 5-week period. So we're not looking at the current pay period per se, but we're looking at the trailing 5 weeks prior to that. So that 5-week score, 5 weeks compiled, is what drives these scores. So as of yesterday, these are the top 10 locations, ISS locations, with the best invalid punch score. Now, not to take away from anybody else, however, I will tell you here that of the 290 ISS districts that we have across the U.S. and Canada, 103 of those districts actually have a 4.0 score. So you may not have been part of the actual, your ISS area or company may not have been a 4.0, but one of the districts in that particular company may have had indeed a 4.0. So I won't, for the sake of time and kind of list the space here, I won't list all 103 districts, but 103 had a perfect score. 40 of the districts outside of that had a score between 3.5 and 3.99, so they were actually compliant. And overall, that 143 is 49% compliant with a goal right now of a 3.5 or higher, but anyone can approve. So our goal from this call today is to get everyone at a minimum of 3.5. If we can get you to 3.5, that is phenomenal. And you will see that many locations across the U.S. and in Canada are actually not even close to a 3.5, unfortunately. So using the tips that we talk about here on how to stop invalid punches will assist everybody and help you improve dramatically. So moving forward, how do we stop the epidemic? And I call it an epidemic because it seems to be one of those things that can be quickly taken out of, can go real spread and go out of control real quick if we don't control it. Now remember, correcting an invalid punch, as I mentioned earlier, is still going to record negatively on the compliance scoring, and that's just kind of how we did it. If it's an invalid punch coming in, it's going to always be recorded in the background as an invalid punch. The permanent fix here is to be made is basically made is to ensure that 0 invalid punches are recorded, achieving allowing you to achieve that 4.0 score. Now, like I said, a good goal for everyone is about 3.5 or higher, straight across the board in all of our metrics. This is just one of the 5 metrics we'll be talking about over the next couple weeks. And I'll go through that a little later in our call. But for the first week here, we're going to focus on invalid punches. All editors, submitters, and approvers, everyone that's right now connected to this webinar, every one of you have the tools and the access needed to make these permanent fixes. So anything I show here today, unless where I noted otherwise, is something that you can actually log into the system and make those fixes today. So let's get started. And kind of our goal here is, as we go through the how to stop and how to go forward here, how to stop this epidemic, is to go through and apply these changes this week from what we've gathered and learned from these webinars this week. And hopefully by the end of the week, we can actually put a stop to some of these invalid punches that we have looming out there in our system. So let's address Walter clocks. For those that have Walter clocks, we're going to go through that first. And for those that don't have Walter clocks, just bear with me, and we're going to go through all the 4 different types of time collection and how to go through and stop that epidemic that I've been referencing. So for Walter clocks, everyone who has a clock should first ensure that clocks are working, and that's very maybe very basic items to think about, but most times than not, the clocks may not be working or may not even be plugged in. So that leads to a lot of issues, and employees not be able to clock in or out. So make sure they're working, and make sure that the glass reader is actually clean and dry. Make sure the clocks are accessible. Make sure the clocks are in a place where employees can get to easily. And what I mean by easily is not, make sure that they're obviously first the office is unlocked, or the supply closet, wherever it may be, make sure that's unlocked, but more so the placement of the clock. If you have something in front of the clock, the employee then has to either stretch or maneuver themselves like a gymnast into a tight space where they might not be able to adequately put their fingerprint on the reader, and that can lead to a invalid punch. So keep that in mind as well. Clocks need to be accessible. The supervisor and lead should be properly trained, and when possible, be present at punch in and punch out, so that way they can actually see the issues and take care, and maybe even know and take care of those issues while the employee is there. Employees are indeed registered. In most cases, and it's kind of rather alarming that a lot of the times we see invalid punches as it relates to a Walter device. Sometimes the employee is not even registered on that clock. It's something that's the step one of using the clock, but that's often forgotten. So we want to make sure that all of our employees are indeed registered. And please don't forget the new employees. We have new employees that start jobs all the time. When they get to a job site, they have to be able to be on the clock, to be able to register on the clock, to be able to punch in and punch out successfully. Employees with repeat issues need to be re-registered. One of the things that the ePay team will stress to you is that re-register employees. If someone is reporting an issue, just go through the motions, get on the clock, make sure they get re-registered, and let's see if that works. Sometimes you will find that you just didn't capture the image the first time, good enough. So when you go through the system, go through back to the clock, re-register them one more time, and see if that works. If that still fails, or if you have other employees that have chronic failures, we can actually configure the employee record to bypass that fingerprint check. So one of the things that is possible is we can go to the employee record, we basically uncheck the enable function, enable the fingerprint, and the system would sync up with the time clock, and at which point the employee can go back to the clock, still placing their finger, still entering their number like they do now, and the system will essentially bypass that fingerprint check. Now, from a standpoint of the employees, we don't tell them that we've done this. And the good reason why we don't tell them is because we want them to think that nothing has changed. We want them to still be prompted for the finger. We still want them to put their employee number into the clock. And the system will act just normal like it typically does now. The only difference is now it's going to mysteriously and magically work for this employee. And the employee will be very happy that we figured it out for him or her. So that's the kind of the Walters. Those are the key things to keep in mind, with that last bullet point being the big one. If we have an employee that needs to have their fingerprints disabled, we can do that. But that is one thing that the IT ePay team can do for you. And all we do is we ask you to enter a help desk ticket for that assistance. So for FONEN now, we need to ensure, and FONEN once again is our time and attendance system that is used on a phone with a toll-free number. It's a toll-free number that's available in English and in Spanish. And the employee can actually go to the phone, pick up their phone, dial that number, and be prompted with an employee ID first, prompt. They'll enter the employee ID. And the system automatically knows that based on the caller ID that he or she is calling from, it's going to link it to a specific job number. And that's kind of what we hope, is that one-to-one relationship between a phone number and job. Now, on the job setup here, we can actually make sure that all the phone numbers that they're going to be using at that job are actually set up on the job record in Blueforce. Everyone on this phone call has access to doing this step. You can go into that FONEN and time clock setup a tab on the job record and go in there and key in the numbers. Now, when you actually register a phone number here, you want to separate those phone number entries with commas. There's no spaces between the numbers. It's just numbers, commas, etc. Now, like I said, everyone here does have access to doing that. So if you're on this phone call today, you can go in here and take care of your own phone numbers. Now, if employees are working from multiple phone-in sites and maybe using a cell phone, so we used to have those SONIM phones, those rugged phones walking around between job to job, and we now replace them with those new Samsung J3 phones. In either case, if you're using FONEN, an employee could actually use that same phone number. It's realistic that that same number could be used for multiple jobs. If that is the case, then someone here on one of our team members on the ePay team can actually go through and disable the enable caller ID matching on those jobs that employee or employees may work. That way, the validation is not occurring saying that it's an invalid punch, but it still is recording that phone-in punch. It is still recording that number that is being used to punch in and punch out. But however, I will stress that since more and more of our sites are getting the new Samsung J3 phones, it is an actual strong option for everyone to explore the use of Mobile Punch instead, because it's more reliable and it's actually more cost effective if we use the mobile app versus the actual phone-in system. And I will say on this phone call that the long-term plan here is for phone-in to slowly dim and go away, and we transition to that Mobile Punch option. So once again, I would stress, let's go ahead and look at that Mobile Punch. Now, the bottom line, the thing about phone-in is to keep in mind that by registering a phone-in phone number, the system will automatically default the employee's job number, saving the employee time and from possible error. So what I mean by that, once again, is if the employee is calling in on this toll-free number, all they're going to have to do is put in their employee ID. The system will automatically recognize that phone number and say, oh, you belong to job 500001. Therefore, I'm not going to ask you for the job number. I'm just going to ask you if you want to punch in or punch out. And that really, in reality, is what the system is doing, saving that time, saving that employee some time, and it's saving that employee the opportunity to key in the wrong job number there. Next, we have Mobile Punch. And with Mobile Punch is there, once again, for the mobile app that's on the phone. But we have to make sure when you're using Mobile Punch, you have to ensure that the job site address is correct in Blueforce, as this drives the GPS coordinates. If it's not correct in Blueforce, then it has to be corrected in JD Edwards first. Now, I say that, and many of you on this phone call do not have access to JD Edwards, and that's understandable. However, JDE is a system of record. When we set up jobs, when I would say all of you on this phone call, the field sites, set up jobs, before that job is set up by someone here at corporate, it actually goes through hopefully a couple checks. We're checking address is correct on your end, but more so on our side when we get it, we enter what's off of that setup form. If that address is wrong, we need to get it corrected in JDE, so that way it can sync up and link up over into Blueforce. Now, we can also increase the acceptable punch radius as needed. By default, the default radius in the system is a 0.2 mile radius. And we can actually increase that radius up to 2 miles. Now, 0.2 miles is a good, we'll say 2 city blocks, just for sake of discussion here. Now, in saying that, your employees might be parking 5 blocks down the street and then walking to the building. Well, if that's the case, and let's say worst case, and we have a couple sites that do this, but let's say they're 5 blocks down the street, and that's also where our supply cabinet is, or that's where actually they start their day. Well, if you're asking them to punch in, 5 blocks away or across the whole campus, chances are that they're not going to be seen as being at the job site if our radius is still set at 0.2 miles. So in that case, let's look at increasing those specific jobs to a radius of up to 2 miles as needed. Now 2 miles might be overkill because now you're thinking, oh, 2 miles is a long distance, which in most jobs it is, but we can always look to increase it to 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, even 0.5, just small increments to make that radius a little bit more realistic in some of our sites. Now, employees also working multiple GPS sites in a day, what I would recommend is a lot of employees, especially our route cleaners, they go from job to job to job all day. So one of the things you can do from that perspective is have them punch into the next job when they arrive at the next job versus when they leave the current job. A lot of our employees now are actually working at job 1 during the day. They punch in there and they say, you know what, I'm leaving, I'm going to job 2 now. So they go ahead and punch into job 2 before they even get to job 2. So that right there is an invalid punch. Recommendation, have them punch in when they get to that job site. If you want the clock to continue to run continuously the whole time, then have them punch in when they get to job A, finish their job, walk over to or drive over to job B, punch in again, go over to job C, punch in again, and continue to that. So they're just punching in all day or during their shift, and then only punch out at the end of the day or shift. What this will do is it will actually keep the punches in consecutive order, obviously, but it's going to keep them a lot cleaner. It's going to actually match those punches every time they punch in. We have a process in Blueforce that's called auto close. And auto close actually allows the employee this opportunity to just punch in, etc. And every time they punch in again, the system will automatically close their prior punch and move close their prior punch. So close job A, for example. When they get to job B, job A is closed, and now job B's time is on the meter. When they get to job C, they will actually punch in again, and then job B is now closed, and job C is now on the meter, etc. Until the end of the day or shift, they actually use the option to punch out. So that will actually save a lot of time, a lot of headache, by having the employees just simply punch in from site to site. And that works tremendously on the Mobile Punch app. And lastly, it leads us to WebPunch. WebPunch, whenever using WebPunch, please ensure that the employees are punching in and out from authorized computers or kiosks. So whatever you have set aside, or if you've told the employee, this is the computer you need to use to punch in and punch out, please keep them to that. You have the IP address on that machine, and the IP address is nothing more than an internet address. At that job site is often changing. For example, maybe have what they refer to as dynamic IPs. Then remove the IP address validation from the job by unchecking the Enable Usage from Authorized List option. Now, I will say that for those that are using WebPunch now, which is probably, I would say, 10% of the population of using Blueforce, we're not utilizing this functionality as of yet. However, should we ever need to, we can actually go through and authorize specific IP addresses to limit what computers an employee can actually punch in and out of. So that is a functionality that is available should we need it. So those are the 4 time collection methods that we have, and kind of some of the tips that you can do to improve those invalid punches. Once again, the Walters, the phone-in system, the Mobile Punch, and now the Web Punch. Now going forward, some other things you can do to help stay on top of this invalid punch is to use Hubble. Now for many of you on this phone call, you already are set up, or have you at least heard of the word Hubble before. And in Hubble, we have this dashboard called the ePay Compliance Dashboard. It's going to provide you a listing of all the employees that have recorded an invalid punch in that last 5-week period. So this is the best tool to provide you a quick checklist. So in Hubble, if you go into the invalid punch section and look at that metric, you can actually go through and actually see by job, actually not by job, see kind of a list of all your employees and what the percentage of invalid punches they have. So I can go through there and show that, you know, I have an employee that 96% of the time is recording an invalid punch. And with that, it'll give me the breakdown of how many punches were recorded on the Walter device, the phone-in device, as well as via Mobile Punch. So you can actually see where the issue is for this particular employee. Hubble also allows you to break down the results into area, district, project, and job levels. So you can always see your compliance scores in different granular levels. And most district managers, like I mentioned, and higher, have access to Hubble already. So if you have access, please log in there and actually run the ePay compliance dashboard so you can actually go in there and see this invalid punch listing. But more so, look at your compliance scores so you can keep on top and see where you are and how you can, where you stack up against everybody, and then more so see how you can improve that particular metric. And in any case, the IT ePay team, which consists of myself, Tiandra, Jade, and Beth, each one of us is one of your assigned point of contacts, and we can provide you additional assistance with this particular piece as needed. So the question continues on is, how do I get additional support away from either Invalid Punches or just general from ePay? If you need additional support, the first option is to always contact the ISS IT support team. That's myself, Tiandra, Jade, and Beth. Now, in either of those cases, we ask you to go through and put in, first off, a help desk ticket using that fms.iss.biz link. If you don't have, for some reason, can't get to a computer or can't get to that site, you can always go and just call that IT help desk. That's at 210-495-6093. And we always ask that you use one of these two methods and always enter that help desk ticket, either by calling or actually going and put in that ticket yourself. The big issue here is that we put this policy into place because we want to assure that every end user request doesn't get overlooked, and we often get inundated with emails and voicemails. So it makes sure that if you go through the help desk, you actually get a spot in the queue and you get attention a little bit more quicker than you would otherwise. As a secondary option, contact ePay support directly. Now, ePay support really is there for an after-hours piece. So after general business hours and on weekends and holidays, they're open 24/7. And they're really there for after-hours and Walter issues only, so time clock issues. And if you need to go through to ePay support, you can contact them via email or by phone there as well. Now, as we go through here, I know we went through quite a few different points on the Invalid Punch discussion today. This is actually one of the small metrics of the 5 that are out there. So next week's sessions, we'll be going through our next metric, which is going to be manual punches, and kind of how to resolve manual punches and kind of how to prevent a lot of that stuff from occurring. And in the meantime, just keep everyone aware that these sessions occur every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. Central. This week's sessions will both be on Invalid Punches, so no need to come back to Thursday unless you want to hear it again. Next week's sessions, again, Tuesday and Thursday, same time, 2 p.m. Central. Short sessions, we'll talk about manual punches next time. So until we talk again, thank you for joining up today. And like I mentioned, I will be posting both of this recorded session as well as the slides I used today online at the end of the week. Thank you so much for joining today, and we'll catch you again next week when we talk about manual punches.